He promised a budget for growth, but in delivering his fiscal plans, the UK Chancellor of the Exchequer in fact revealed that the economy will grow at a slower rate than previously forecast, and Britain will need to borrow more in the next 5 years. Well, to pacify voters, George Osborne hit oil companies, banks and the wealthy in a move to try and ease taxpayers' austerity pain. Well, to get some reaction now, I'm joined by Ed Balls, the Shadow Chancellor. Thank you very much for joining us today. You've said that George Osborne was taking a big gamble in yesterday's budget, but actually there weren't an awful lot of options open to him. Wouldn't your plans also be a gamble as well, that we would actually end up perhaps possibly with a lower credit rating, indeed with higher rates, and therefore having to borrow more?
Well, the gamble which George Osborne took was really last year in the June budget and the spending review, and his decision to move away from a steady pace of deficit reduction to halve the deficit over 4 years, to try and do the whole thing in one parliament, which is, the biggest deficit reduction plan of any major economy anywhere in the world. That was last year, and really what he said yesterday was, I'm sticking to that plan. As you said, a couple of small changes here or there, a quite embarrassing downgrade of the growth forecast and the unemployment forecast, but he basically said, I'm going to carry on doing what I'm doing. And the big market judgment, the big political judgment, is he right or wrong? And as you know, the markets the public wants a credible deficit reduction plan, but there's a real question, I think, as to whether you get credibility from being tougher and tougher and tougher. We've all seen finance ministers in countries under real pressure going out a week before things fall apart and saying, I'll be even more austere than you thought. And sometimes with markets that can make people feel actually a bit spooked, because unless there's growth, unless the economy is creating jobs, it'll be much harder to get the deficit down. And we've seen today Moody's put out a warning saying if there's no growth in the British economy this year, that will be bad for confidence and credibility, make it harder to get the deficit down. My argument has always been that George Osborne's going too far and too fast. This isn't credible because it's too tough, and too tough is actually undermining of market confidence rather than the other way around.
But where do you stand right now? I mean, your personal view was that the UK shouldn't be attempting any deficit reduction at all right now. When you see what's happening in Portugal, does that not concern you? At what level do you think it is safe to reduce the deficit while promoting growth? What is that magic balance?
Well, a year ago, when Labour was the government, where the economy was recovering, when unemployment was coming down, when market rates were low, when we had no problem getting our auctions away given our term structure, at that time we were halving the deficit over 4 years. That's what we would be doing. I think what happened over the course of the last 9 months is George Osborne said, I'm going to go much faster, big rise in VAT, start the spending cuts earlier. The consequence has been the biggest fall in consumer confidence for 20 years. That's the problem. Now, we would be reducing the deficit. Actually, we were overachieving. The problem is, because he's tried to go faster, he's actually sent the economy and unemployment into reverse. And this parallel with Portugal, it really is complete nonsense. The fact is that first of all, Portugal, like Greece, Spain, Ireland, they are in the Eurozone. They've got a massive real exchange rate problem. They've got a huge competitiveness problem, as well as issues in the banking sector, without the flexibility on the exchange rate. Secondly, they started this crisis with massively higher levels of debt than all the big economies, certainly Britain. And thirdly, with a small economy like that, but where they've had no growth at all last year, clearly they're in big trouble. In Britain, we actually had growth last year. Our problem is that by this sort of political analogy with the southern European states as a justification for George Osborne to go faster, it's actually backfiring. Growth is going into reverse.
OK, Mr. Balls, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Pleasure, Andrea.